Welcome to The Story. I'm David Mulco in for Pat Doris tonight. This week we are taking a closer look at the critical shortage of public defenders in Oregon. It is a chronic challenge that was made even worse by COVID. Understaffed, underfunded, with a backlog of pandemic-delayed cases that, as you'll see from our reporting, has pushed the system to what seems like the brink of collapse. And so we begin this evening with part 2 of our new series called Injustice. Dozens of cases outright dismissed, more than 1,000 defendants without legal representation is something that's guaranteed by the Constitution, the Sixth Amendment. But in case after case after case, it doesn't appear to be happening, at least not in a timely way. Now, in part 1 last night, we heard from criminal defendants who are facing the choice of sitting in jail for weeks with no lawyer or trying to learn how to represent themselves. And this systemic breakdown, perhaps justice delayed or justice denied, depending on the outcome and your perspective here, also affects those on the other side, those who have often suffered deeply, the victims of crime. Here's investigative reporter Kyle Iboshi on how this crisis affects them.
I really can't speak to how frustrating it is, you know.
Jay Blake can't seem to catch a break.
Yeah.
On September 27th, a vandal smashed the front windows of his family-owned business on Southwest Salmon Street. It was the 4th time that B Tailors and Cleaners had been hit in the past 2 years.
I'm just sick of it. I can't explain how it's hard enough to run a business in downtown Portland, and to have this go on, it's just you just want to give up. You honestly just say enough. I can't do it anymore.
A string of at least 5 different downtown businesses reported being vandalized late on September 27th. The broken glass would require nearly $10,000 in repairs. Portland police arrested 29-year-old Tyler Miller after watching him use a large metal street sign pole to break a door and several windows, according to court records. Miller was booked into the Multnomah County Jail and charged with 3 counts of criminal mischief in the first degree. Serious felony charges.
And I had heard that he was going to be prosecuted, that he was going to spend some time, that we're going to send a message to the vandal community that we're not going to put up with this.
Next, ready, page 20, line 2, Asa Jaramillo.
Miller appeared in arraignment court roughly 14 hours later, where a Multnomah County judge explained that no court-appointed lawyers were available.
We are in a crisis in our state in not having enough public defenders to appoint every individual that appears before the court on any given day.
And as there's no attorney to appoint to him in this matter, and he's
a public defender who would represent Miller for just a few minutes during his arraignment asked for the charges to be dropped because Miller didn't have court-appointed counsel, as required by the Sixth Amendment. Instead of dismissing the charges, the judge postponed the case and asked Miller to come back in 6 weeks.
But at this point in time, you will be released.
For crime victims, this crisis in the criminal justice system can be devastating.
I really can't speak to how frustrating it is, you know, and to have those guys that are just cycled through is just ridiculous.
The shortage of public defenders is causing many criminal cases to drag on.
We don't have an attorney today. We do not have enough attorneys.
Because hearings are constantly being pushed back and trials delayed, extending the victim's trauma that much longer and eroding confidence in the criminal justice system.
The system has run amok.
Jordan Schnitzer had the windows in his downtown building smashed out too on September 27th.
The window was shattered this morning with glass inside and outside.
Only to learn the defendant was released hours later.
Okay, what's the point of arresting anybody when they know they'll be back on the street and sort of, you know, saying, to heck with you. You can't do anything to me.
Many defendants do get a public defender at arraignment, although court officials must prioritize those precious resources. Typically, preference goes to defendants who are in jail or those charged with more serious offenses.
So it's unsettling.
The frustration extends to police and prosecutors, who've seen serious criminal cases dismissed and defendants released for lack of a public defender.
Yeah, there he is, back on the street.
And just to continue that story, Tyler Miller, the man accused of smashing those windows in downtown Portland, was actually rearrested after being released from jail. 2 weeks later, police say they caught him smashing windows at a different storefront in downtown Portland. So you can see how frustrating that is for victims.
I mean, for shop owners like Jay Blake. Also, you mentioned police and prosecutors who pour so many resources into cases like these only to have them thrown out or delayed. And it all comes back again to this chronic problem, a shortage of public defenders.
Right. One case in particular that stands out. I was talking to a prosecutor about this one. U.S. Marshals and Multnomah County Sheriff's Office conducted a big drug bust, seized all kinds of evidence, including 10,000 fentanyl pills. And you've done a lot of reporting on this. You know how serious fentanyl is in our community.
Yeah.
Exactly. So 10,000 pills here. A serious offender. This gentleman appears in court. There's no public defender available, so he's allowed to go free. He's released from jail. For prosecutors and police, extremely frustrating. They poured so much into this case only to see this defendant back on the street.
So we have heard from suspects. We have heard from crime victims. I imagine now you're going to take on and tackle the system here.
Right, through the lens of a public defender. And these are the folks who are working really, really hard here. Unfortunately, there just aren't enough lawyers to go around. So we'll look at the system as a whole. We should also remind folks, if you want to watch the entire series, it's available on KGW.com and also streaming on KGW+.
Thanks, Kyle. Looking forward to part 3. We're exactly 2 weeks from Election Day. There's arguably no bigger issue on the ballot than what to do, though, about our homeless crisis. Over the past few weeks, including during our debate, you heard from the candidates for Oregon governor on housing, on substance use treatment, and more. And of course, in the last few days, we brought you as much as we know about Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler's plan to create large camps known as campuses and eventually ban unsanctioned camping. By the way, he presents that plan to council tomorrow. And speaking of city council, there is one open seat with incumbent Joanne Hardesty facing business lawyer Renee Gonzalez. I moderated a debate between the two of them a few weeks back in association with the City Club of Portland. That is still worth checking out. But this is such a critical issue and time that our Blair Best, who covers the crisis and solutions really day in and day out, circled back to both candidates today. She sits down with Renee Gonzalez.
Voters say homelessness is their #1 concern heading into the November election. And while it is a statewide issue, it's concentrated here in Portland. Now, we talked with Gonzalez for about 20 minutes today on what he would do differently to address this crisis if elected.
We've got to think big on how we address this issue.
Longtime Portlander, Democrat, and father of 3, Renee Gonzalez describes the state of Portland streets as rough and depressing.
They feel dangerous, they feel unwelcoming, and sometimes unusable.
You say City Hall's ineffective, ideologically driven policies are ruining the city that we used to proudly call home. What do you mean by that as it pertains to the homeless crisis?
Well, we don't drive the discussion with data, and let me be very specific. We tend to homogenize the issue, describe it entirely as an affordability challenge, and when you dig into the data, particularly with respect to the unsheltered, those we interact with daily on the streets, we have a substantial crisis of disabilities. 1 and 2 on that list are addiction and mental illness.
Expanding Portland's addiction treatment services, he says, is dependent on partnering with the state and county.
In your eyes, what isn't working with how the city is handling the homeless crisis, and how could you change that?
Yeah, we're not building nearly enough shelter. And I define that very broadly, everything from safe sleeping spaces to high barrier shelter. We've underinvested in shelter. We've told Portlanders they need to wait to address some of the crisis on our streets until there's enough affordable housing in the area. That day may never come.
You speak of prioritizing shelter. Well, what about the homeless population that refuses to go into shelter? Recent studies show that majority of the people on the streets prefer to stay in their tents.
Yeah, so I think, again, we're going to have to segment that, not treat the whole, what I would call service-resistant population and unsheltered population the same. There are folks that have legitimate concerns about going to shelter, if particularly low barrier shelter. On the other end of the spectrum, if you don't want to go to shelter because you have a gun, because you want to use hard drugs, because you want to continue to engage in criminal activity, then I think they need to face the criminal justice system.
Do you really think that taking people off the streets and putting them into the criminal justice system, if that's the only option, is the best approach, since sometimes that just continues the cycle?
If they're engaging in car thefts, bike thefts, catalytic converter thefts, low-level vandalism, if they are breaking into stores to feed habits and they happen to hide out in our unsanctioned camps, I think we absolutely have to disrupt that cycle.
How will you ensure that these ideas don't just remain conceptual, and how do you plan to get the rest of City Hall behind you?
Well, I think City Hall is moving in the direction I've been articulating since I entered this race. I am running against the most radical member of City Council on these issues, at times the most anti-law enforcement, at times the most passive with respect to addressing unsheltered camps. And so you replace the most radical member of City Council with someone who I think is more in line with where the city wants to go in addressing these issues. I think we're going to have 3 to 4 votes very consistently on a lot of the things I'm describing.
We also talked of his response to the mayor's 5-part plan announced last week, which includes a move to ban unsanctioned homeless camping. Gonzalez says he supports the plan and that it's heading in the right direction. You can watch the full interview on our YouTube channel. And next week, we're scheduled to talk with Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. Blair Best, KGW News.
Still to come, where does Joe Kent work? And maybe a bigger question, who paid the Republican congressional candidate 6 figures last year? A report from the Daily Beast couldn't turn up any proof the company he says he works for exists. So we did our own search. We'll reveal what we found and what happened when we showed up to the former Green Berets town hall when the story returns.
Welcome back. Keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. Give us a call, leave us a voicemail. Have I mentioned this team loves listening to your voicemails, and we love putting them on air even more than that. That is 503-226-5090. Okay, Let us talk about Joe Kent, the former Green Beret at one time employed by the CIA, who is running as the Republican candidate in Washington's 3rd congressional district. He is Trump endorsed, and whether or not you agree with his platform or policies as voters begin marking their ballots here, questions have now surfaced about who is paying his salary. Let us explain. The Daily Beast published a piece Monday essentially saying the company Kent says he worked for last year does not seem to exist. The article reports that Kent says he was paid just over $122,000 last year as a project manager for a tech startup called American Enterprise Solutions. But the Daily Beast says it couldn't find patents, trademarks, licenses, a website, social media, or any government contracts tied to a company of that name. So the reporter asked Kent's team for a response. A spokesperson reportedly told them American Enterprise Solutions is a tech company registered in Delaware and operated out of Reston, Virginia. So the team at the Daily Beast says they followed up and couldn't find a company registered with that name in Delaware, or for that matter, in Virginia either. You know, we got several questions from viewers about this. So JD said, the Daily Beast is running a story that says there's no record of the company existing that Joe Kent says he works for. Is it a real story? Is the story garbage? Well, we checked it out, JD. Thanks for the question, by the way. Our investigative team ran its own search. The Daily Beast says they could not find a record of the company, and you know, neither could we. We checked 3 separate public records databases. They all came up empty for business entities registered in Delaware under that name, American Enterprise Solutions. When we did a national search for American Enterprise Solutions, we found several businesses, none of them in Delaware. The Daily Beast, by the way, says it chased down some similar name companies in Georgia and Florida with no, they reported, Joe Kent connection there. After that, we decided to go to the source, Joe Kent, reaching out to his campaign multiple times yesterday. We even sent Catherine Cook to his town hall event in Vancouver last night to ask him about it. He told Catherine he was not taking questions from the media. Instead, a campaign staffer told her they plan to release a statement about it sometime today. Now, so far, nothing, and we've followed up multiple times. Though in just the last few minutes here, OPB publishing a report saying the Kent team responded to them today and showed them what appeared to be partial tax documents for a company with a similar but not an exact name, and that Kent reportedly told them, OPB, quote, "There's a good chance I screwed it up," end quote, meaning the name. That's OPB reporting. KGW obviously working to verify that with the campaign. And to put this into context for you, context is important because this is a tight race, and Trump-endorsed Kent says he decided to run after incumbent Jamie Herrera Butler voted to impeach the former president. Now, Kent's opponent, Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, has tried to convince Republican, is trying to as well in Southwest Washington, who do not support Trump or Kent's positions, to vote blue instead. By the way, Perez tweeting yesterday, quote, "My business definitely exists, not that anyone needed to ask," end quote. Perez co-owns an auto repair shop in Portland. Now, at that rally we talked about Monday evening, we did talk to people who showed up in Clark County to support Kent. We talked to them about the report, and they said he still has their vote.
When I was in the military, we had a feeling like we're all Americans. We weren't separated by race or religion or any other differences like that, but they were divisive. And so that's what I really like about Joe and Tulsi being here, is that we need to rekindle that feeling in America, that we're all Americans. We may have different opinions on things, but we're all united as Americans.
This is good energy. This is positive energy. These are people that want to see a change. They want to see people working together to make things better. So yeah, kind of excited.
And we are excited to get to the bottom of it. We're working on it. We'll keep you posted. By the way, at Kent's side last night, former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who recently defected from the Democratic Party. Now, both Kent and Perez are scheduled to join Laurel Porter right here on this week's Straight Talk. We would love to know what you want to hear from them. Just send us an email at thestory@kgw.com. All right, when we come back, the Oregonian takes a hard look in the rearview mirror, and what the team found there was not pretty. A history of racist and xenophobic views, something the paper's executive editor called, quote, sins of commission, going back to founder Henry Pittock 161 years ago. We're going to share the paper's apology to all Oregonians and talk to the reporter on this series when the story continues. Welcome back. We want to tell you about a new series of reports that the team at The Story thinks is definitely worth your time. It comes from the Oregonian. It is titled Publishing Prejudice. You can see the text on the left side here. It's all about the Oregonian's racist legacy. Now, the series begins with an unreserved apology from the current editor of the paper, Therese Bottomley. She says for decades following its founding in 1861, the Oregonian promoted racist and xenophobic views, stirred hatred, prejudice, and unwarranted fear. Now, Bottomley writes, quote, what the Oregonian published time and time again was objectively abhorrent. The historical coverage was not solely responsible for discriminatory policies, practices, or outcomes, of course, but when the Oregonian might have helped forge a better path, it frequently failed to do so. At times, it used its position of power to help lead those discriminatory efforts. Part one of this series, a powerful introspective that details some of the things uncovered by investigative reporter Rob Davis, who took a deep dive into the paper's archives, one that began more than a year ago. And I started our conversation by asking him what struck him most as he began this journey.
The absolute depth of the hatred and racism that the Oregonians viewed for decades. You know, when we got into it, I knew that the history was going to be challenging and ugly, but it was like that decade after decade after decade, you know, in a state that was founded on these ideals of excluding Black people from its borders. You know, the Oregonian helped to amplify and disenfranchise and celebrate the disenfranchisement of Black people and people of color, you know, through the 1800s, well into the 1900s.
So in this first piece, Davis focuses on Henry Pittock, the publisher and majority owner, and Harvey Scott, the editor and minority owner, who together ran the paper from 1861 all the way until 1919. Davis did not mince words. He told me time and time again he uncovered that their work made Oregon a more hostile place for people of color. One of the most extreme examples, how the Oregonian covered the lynching of a Black man named Alonzo Tucker in 1902. Davis writing that it is the, quote, worst example of how the paper both excused and minimized lynchings into the 20th century.
Alonzo Tucker was a boxer and a shoe shiner who lived in what was then called Marshfield, now Coos Bay. He was accused of raping a white woman, the wife of a local coal miner. A mob tried to intervene after he was arrested. He spent the night hiding under the docks along the bay and was found the next morning, was shot, and he was eventually hung. And, you know, the newspaper published one dispatch from one of its correspondents congratulating the mob, said, well done. In editorials, it simultaneously excused the lynching, but also said that lynchings were bad, that this isn't something that was becoming of places that had law and order. You know, at the same time that it's saying we're a law and order place, it's saying things like that the mob acted with quiet and decorum.
Another thing editor Therese Bottomley noted in her apology, what she called the unprecedented level of outside review on this series, allowing others inside and outside the Oregonian and outside the usual editorial structure here to read drafts to help shape these stories. So we asked Rob Davis to explain why.
Well, I'm a white man, and the editor of the story was a white man, and we knew that we needed to not only involve our staff, involved, you know, we involved our diversity committee. We had two former chairs of our diversity committee who no longer work for the newspaper review the stories. This was 5 months ago, to help us shape the reporting and to shape the storytelling. We then sent it out to another perspectives panel that we created of 5 people of color in the community. to, again, try to be inclusive in the journalism that we're doing. It was for me as an investigative reporter who's not used to a lot of people having hands on my work from outside before I publish, it was absolutely essential. It was a huge learning experience for me about the value of the inclusivity in our journalism, and from tapping those voices, that was just absolutely essential.
And finally, I asked Davis what he hopes readers in Oregon and beyond take away from learning about the paper's documented and deliberate racist past and how its coverage contributed to some of the challenges Oregon is facing today.
We're not responsible for our past. We're responsible for knowing about it. It's the insight that I heard from Black Studies professor at Portland State as I was getting this off the ground. And I think that is the most important idea here. We are not responsible for what Harvey Scott and Henry Pittick did, but we are responsible for knowing about it. And it's my hope that we can educate our community, give them the critical information that they need to make intelligent decisions, and that this helps to inform that.
You know, we all share in that responsibility. This is an ongoing series. One example that is forthcoming, how the paper covered the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Now head to OregonLive.com to read Rod Davis's first piece and Therese Bottomley's apology there, because they are both certainly worth your time. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to the story at KGW.com. We're going to finish this show right after this. You know, I love that music. I keep telling the story team, we need a longer version of that. Okay, for our Hey Help profile this week, we are talking about the KGW Great Toy Drive. Put a Santa hat on the pumpkin. I know it's not Halloween, but last year, with your help, we donated over 30,000 toys to local kids. This year, we are raising the bar. Head to kgw.com/toy to sign up. We'll send a collection kit, and then you can help collect toys for local families. Again, kgw.com/toy. You know what? It's been a pleasure the last 3 shows here. Pat is back tomorrow, Wednesday. On behalf of the story team here, including Ashley, Colton, Lindsay, and Zach, I am David Molko. Laurel, though, is here next with your headlines. The news at 6:30 starts right now.